Hello, my name is Keshwani. That's K-E-S-H-W-A-N-I, Keshwani. We are here because we want to improve our math skill. Today is our day number 43. The problem is already on the blackboard. I'm going to read it to you. It says, for the given circle with center O, here's your circle with the center O. For the given circle with center O, which of the following bits of information would be enough to ascertain the radius of the circle? So we have to figure out the radius of this circle. The question is, which of the following bits, three pieces of information that is given here, which of these following three bits of information is enough by itself to figure out the radius of the circle? The first one is the length of the arc ABC. Here's your ABC, ABC, the length of this arc. That's a 90 degrees there, they tell you. The length of the chord AC, the length of the chord A to C, or the perimeter of the triangle AOC. Which of the following bits of information is enough by itself to ascertain the value, to figure out the value of the radius of the circle? And here are your answer choices. A is none, B 1 only, C 1 and 2 only, D 1 and 3 only, and E 1, 2 and 3. What I want you to do now is to pause the video, solve the problem yourself. Once you feel that you have the answer, you can resume it and check your work against my work. Alright? I'm going to be quiet for a couple of seconds to give you a chance to pause and unpause. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get out of the frame and I'm going to be right back, okay? Alright, let's get going then. What's the first thing that they give you here? The length of arc ABC. The length of arc ABC. Here's your arc ABC. What do we know about this arc? We know that this is 90 degrees. If this is 90 degrees, then what does that arc represent? If this angle is 90 degrees, then this arc ABC, the arc ABC, I shouldn't have spelled out arc with a capital letter because now it's confusing with ABC. The arc ABC represents a quarter of the circle. So if we know the length of the quarter of the circle, what can we figure out from there? Well, if it represents the length of the quarter of the circle, if we know the length of the quarter of a circle, we know the length of the whole circle. I don't know why I had this uncontrollable urge to write everything out, but that's what it is. If we know the length of the arc ABC, we know the length of the quarter of the circle. Well, if you know the length of the quarter of the circle, we multiply it by 4, we can get the length of the entire circle. And what do we call that? We call it circumference. This part here is your circumference. So one more time, if we know the length of the arc ABC, we know the quarter of the circumference. If we know the quarter of the circumference, we know the whole circumference. Once we know the whole circumference, then we know the circumference equals 2 pi r. If we know the circumference, we know the value of the pi, we can figure out the r. So the first statement by itself is sufficient. First statement is enough. I'm going to erase everything because we need the room. One more time before I erase it. The arc ABC represents quarter of the circle. As you can clearly see, it represents quarter of the circle because we are told that this is 90 degrees. 90 times 4 is 360, so this is quarter of a circle. Well, if we know the length of the quarter of a circle, we know the length of the whole circle. That's what I wrote there in a very fast scribble way. If we know the length of the quarter of the circle, we know the length of the entire circle. Well, if you know the length of the entire circle, that's the circumference. If we know the circumference, we can figure out the radius. Just divide both sides by 2 pi. and your radius will simply be circumference over 2 pi. That's all. So if we know the circumference, we can figure out the radius. That's all. So the first statement does do the job, which tells us that whatever the correct answer is, must contain Roman numeral 1 in it, which means any answer choice that does not have 1 in it is not the right answer. So we can cross out all the answer choices which does not contain no Roman numeral 1. Let's see what can we get rid of. A is gone because it says none. Everything else has 1 in it, so everything else stays. Let's look at second statement. The length of the chord AC. I'm going to redraw this triangle here. This is your O. A to O is the radius. Let's call it R. And O to C is the radius R. And therefore, this triangle that we're dealing with, this triangle AOC, is an isosceles triangle because they both are these are radii. This side equals that side because they are both radii of the circle. Radii, for those of you who do not know, the word is radii, which is the plural of radius. Don't say radiuses, there is no such thing. So these two are radii. So the question is, if we know the length of the AC, can we figure out the radius? The answer is, well, we'll find out. Let's call it x. So using the Pythagorean theorem, because this is 90 degrees, using the Pythagorean theorem tells us that x squared equals r squared plus r squared, which gives us 2r squared, and therefore x is r times, x is root 2 times r. There you go. X equals root 2 times r, which should not have been a surprise to us. For those of you who know your 45 triangle, isosceles triangle, if this is 45 degrees and this is 45 degrees, which they are, these are 45 degrees, this is a 45 degree, and this is a 45 degrees. And how do we know that? Because these two sides are equal. Side AO is equal to side CO because they are radius. This side equals that side, therefore this would have to be 45 and 45. And for those of you who know your 45-45 triangle, we know that they are in this ratio. If this side is 1 and this side is 1, then this side is root 2. So whatever the multiple here is, that if this happens to be 7 and this happens to be 7, then this is going to be 7 times root 2. If this happens to be 13 and this happens to be 13, this will be 13 times root 2. And if this happens to be 13 over 4 and 13 over 4, then this will be 13 over 4 times root 2. You get the idea. It's 1 root 2. So in this case here what we have is, this is radius. From here to here is your radius. From O to C was your radius R. O to A is also a radius R. And therefore this will be root 2 times R. So the answer is, if we know the length of the chord, if we know this part, if this is a known quantity, root 2 times R, if we know it, that's what this second sentence says. If we know it, then of course we can figure out the R by dividing that, whatever that known quantity is, by root 2. So the second statement is also true by itself. Second statement is also true by itself. Let's see. Which rules out B, because B says 1 only. And we can also get rid of D because we just found out the second statement by itself also works, which tells me that answer choice D cannot be right answer because it doesn't have Roman numeral 2 in it. So either the third statement works or third statement doesn't. If it works, the answer is going to be B. If it doesn't, the answer is going to be C. Let's look at third statement. That's it. I need to erase all of this thing now. Now, are you able to see that the third statement is very similar to the second statement? They are pretty much same exact information. In the third statement, A, O, C, this is radius, this is radius. I'm not going to change my notation here because that might confuse somebody. Since I started out with a capital R, I'm going to stick with the capital R, even though capital R is not the traditional way to denote the radius. But like we say, the hell with the convention. So from here to here is R. This is to denote that these two sides are equal to each other. This is R, and since this is 90 degrees, and since this side equals to this side, because they are the radii, and since this side equals to that side, therefore this is a 45-45 triangle. And as we already discussed, in a 45-45 triangle, they come in a ratio of 1 root 2. R root 2 times R. Now the question is, if we know the perimeter of AOC, if somebody tells you what this quantity is, R, this side, plus that side, plus root 2 times R, if we know this quantity, K, if we know it, can we figure out the R from that? That's the K. Let's call it, let's just leave it at K. K for the known quantity, you see? Known. Of course we can figure out the R from that because we said take out the R common, you're left with 1 plus root 2 equals K. And if we know K, then R would simply be that known quantity K over 2 plus root 2. Voila. I hope you do not get confused between my K and my R. I'm going to put a different symbol for this thing because it has a potential of confusing somebody. This, if we know the perimeter of AOC, let's call it P for the perimeter. Let's call it small p for the perimeter. And if we know the perimeter, then the radius would simply be the perimeter that is given to us over 2 plus root 2, and that's it. So the third statement also works by itself. The answer is E. The answer is E. All three statements by themselves are sufficient to answer the question. The answer was E. That was it for today. I will see you tomorrow on day number 44. In the meantime, if you wish to get hold of me, go to any of these website addresses and you'll find a link for an email, and you can send me an email. Or you can go to kashwaniprep.com and send me an email from there. This still bothers me. I kept switching between K and P because I put down K, which looks very similar to R, and I put down P for the perimeter, and now I'm not happy with that either. What should we call the length of this perimeter? Why don't we call it L for the length? There you go. The perimeter of AOC, AOC, let's call it L. There. Now it's not confusing. And this R, the big R, is the radius. Right here. The radius of the circle, which is what we were trying to figure out. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Thanks.